Okay, so today we're going to explain IDEA, each of us, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act. So the first principle is free, appropriate public education. So that's kind of basically just saying that even though a student may have disabilities, they should also have public education just like any other student, and it should be free. The next principle is least restrictive education. So students with disabilities, they should be able to be inside the classroom. They should be able to be in public school, just like all the other students as well. They should be treated, regularly. The third principle is individual education. So each person has a different disability. So not everyone has the same disability. Everyone doesn't learn the same way. So you have to make sure that you get in a meeting with, the child's parent, the teachers, everyone, and just make sure you have the correct amount of help that the student needs in order to succeed. The next one is non-discriminatory evaluation. So in the book, it explained how you can't make a question in a test say something like about football. Some students think it's American football, and some students will see it as soccer. So you want to make sure that the questions are about something um, that will be understandable to every student. The fifth one is due process. So I saw this one as if there's an issue going on with the student, there needs to be a full-on investigation type thing to make sure that they get the appropriate needs that they need. You can't just, brush it off and say, no, they don't need this. But while this whole investigation is happening, their education that they were doing stays the same until everything's done with. And the last one is zero reject / child find. So zero reject is you can't just reject a child just because maybe their disability is too, maybe it's too difficult to handle. You can't just reject them. You have to try your best to fit their needs. And child find, that's more of like, make sure there's things showing every parent with childhood disabilities that there are programs to help. There is a public education that can help them as well. Because I really do think that there still are parents out there that they don't want to have their students enrolled in school. But we need to make sure we advertise them and let them know there is education, because anybody, students with disabilities, they all deserve a right to public education. Chloe?
Okay, hi. So I'm gonna go over how pretty much the same things Raquel said. So the first principle of IDEA is free, appropriate public education, which the acronym for is FAPE. So the free, appropriate education, it's just for students that have disabilities, and it's just basically stating that they do have free education, and it does have to cater specifically to their needs. And then there's least restrictive environment, which is for students with, the acronym for is LRE. And so it is for students with disabilities that it's just stating that they need to be basically in an environment that not only they're safe, that they will be able to do the things that are asked of them. So as well as it's illegal basically for the students to not be put into a regular classroom with students that are able, unless it is impossible for them to do their work in that type of classroom. The next one is individualized education, which it's basically just stating that For students with special needs and disabilities, education has to be kind of made to fit their needs. So some of these students may have different types of technology that they use in the classroom. It is put together by a team of professionals and their parents to decide the different things the student needs to do. And basically, it's just like a way of showing how the student's going to get through the year. So non-discriminatory evaluation is just meaning that kind of like what Raquel said, how she gave the example of the book, that they can't talk about football and stuff. For a student whose culture, football could mean soccer, whereas in America it means football. That's the example that the book gave. It has to do with their culture. And also students have to have multiple different exams, or not necessarily exams, but they need to assess them multiple times, not just one time. That can't make a decision from that. And then the next one is the due process. It's basically just saying that if there's a disagreement or an issue occurring in the student's education, that there is a process that has to be followed before any changes can be made. The student may have to, there's going to have to be like a formal hearing, or sometimes even they may go to court about the situation before anything is changed in that student's education. And then the zero reject is the last one. And that has to do with the fact that no students can be excluded from going to school. Nobody can be rejected. It's basically what it says. They can't be told, oh, your child has too many problems, like we can't help them, because that is illegal, and they do have ways that they can help every child. Okay.
Okay, I'm next. The first one is the free appropriate public education, or FAPE. It's just everybody's entitled to a free public education designed to fit their specific needs. The next one is the least restrictive environment. For example, a student with disabilities can be put, for example, in a general education class, and by law they can't be separated. So they're included and they get support services for that. The next one would be the individualized education. That is where they get service and assistance according to their IEP. It's designed just for their education, for their educational needs. Number 4 would be the non-discriminatory evaluation. That's where they do their assessing using instruments that don't discriminate against race, culture, or their disability. Number 5 is due process. Due process would have to do with, like, for example, if there's a dispute on if the child's eligible for special ed services or their placement, things like that. If there's a dispute about that, there's informal and formal procedures in place that they'd have to go through to see, who's right, who's wrong, what they are eligible for. The last one would be the zero reject child find. Of course, that's exactly like what y'all said. The child can't be denied public education because of their disabilities. And the school would have to find a way to give them appropriate education despite what their disabilities are or how many they have.
Okay, so the 6 principles of IDEIA. The first one is the free appropriate public education, and that fits the need of any student regardless of their disability. The second one is the least restrictive environment. That's the best learning environment for students, such as inclusion. The third one is the individualized education, and that is instructional services and other assistance for a student with disabilities, and it must be tailored to meet their assessed needs. The next one is the non-discriminatory evaluation. And then students are assessed using instruments that they do not discriminate students based off of race, culture, or disability. The next one is the due process, and that is the disagreement or issue occurring. There will be a procedure that will take place before any decision is made amongst the student. And the last one is the zero reject, child find. And that is that no student should be turned down for public education because of a disability that they have.
Okay. Again, I'm just going to go over the same 6 principles. The first one is the free appropriate education. Basically just saying that all students, no matter what disability they have the right to free appropriate education that's based on their needs. Next is the least restrictive environment, and that's stating that just as much as possible that they be included and in a general education setting as long as they're being successful at that. And then next is the individualized education, and this usually includes the IEP that's specific to the individual's needs, whatever disability they may have, whatever accommodations that need to be made are done through a multidisciplinary team. Their parents and their professionals come up with the individual program for them. Next is the non-discriminatory evaluation. And that states that when you're assessing somebody who has a disability, you have to make sure that the assessment protocol doesn't involve any biases for race or culture or anything that may skew the results. They have to be assessed, in a non-discriminatory way. Then next one is due process. With due process, it means the placement or the eligibility of somebody who you're trying to get verified for having a disability has to go through formal and informal protocols and regulations. Their education can't change while their investigation's going on. And the last one is the zero reject and child find. And this states that there is no disability that is too big for a school to say they can't take the person. They're obligated by law to accommodate them in their best way that they can. And then the child find means that the school districts are trying to get it out there to find students in the community that have a disability and get them the appropriate education that they need.
Okay, so the 6 principles, starting with number 1, would be appropriate education, where students with disabilities are entitled to attend public schools and receive the educational services that have been designed specifically for their special needs. Next is least restrictive environment, which just means that students with disabilities are to be educated with other children without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate for them. The next is individualized education, and that just means that the schools must collaborate with the parents and students with disabilities in the design and implementation of their special education for their specific needs. Then it's non-discriminatory evaluation, which means that schools must use non-biased methods of evaluation to determine whether a child has a disability and if special education is needed. Next is the procedural due process, which just means that if there's a disagreement, that there's a strict process that must be followed before any changes are made. The last one is zero reject and child find, which just means that the zero reject part is that schools must educate all children with disabilities, and the child find is that the state must provide or be proactive in finding students that could be eligible for special education.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.